Good evening, everybody. Today is Thursday, April 30th, and I'm going to start the way that I normally do with your statistical update. So starting off with the number of tests that we have performed in Sonoma County, we have performed 5,690 tests. In terms of our case count, we currently have 114 active COVID-19 cases, 128 recovered COVID-19 cases, still the 2 fatalities for a total of 244 cumulative COVID-19 cases. Of those cases, the breakdown in terms of gender is 115 male and 129 female. In terms of the age ranges, from in the minor side of things, so ages 0 through 17, we have 25 total cases. In the ages range of 18 to 49, we have 124 cases. In the age range of 50 through 64, we have 57 cases. And in the 65 and older category, we have 38 cases. Looking at the regional spread around Sonoma County, again, we are seeing cases spread throughout Sonoma County. In North County, we have 21 cases, South County, 35, East County, 18, West County, 17, Central County, 145, and under investigation, 8. And just a reminder that that is cumulative cases, so that does not mean that all of those cases are currently active, and I gave the active and recovered breakdown earlier. Of the total cases, 219 of them have not required hospitalization. 25 of them have required hospitalization. And in terms of the breakdown of where they're coming, we are still, fortunately, seeing the majority of our new cases come in from close contacts of confirmed positive. So the current breakdown is cumulatively, we have had 43 cases that were linked to travel, 119 that were linked to close contacts, 45 that were linked to community spread of unknown source, and 37 remain currently under investigation. So today is actually a really big day because tomorrow we expect to have a new shelter-in-place order released. I want to start out by saying something that is very different about the shelter-in-place order than previous orders that might raise alarm until you know why it's happening. So the new shelter-in-place order will not have an end date. Actually, the other Bay Area counties went ahead and ran their shelter-in-place order through the end of May. We are actually choosing not to have an end date, not because we think that we're going to be sheltering in place forever. That is not why we chose not to have an end date, but because we are going to constantly be reevaluating that shelter-in-place order. So the Bay Area counties, what tends to happen is if you set a deadline, you're going to wait until that deadline to really reevaluate it and possibly make amendments to your policy. But quite frankly, by not having a deadline with our shelter-in-place order, it means that we're going to be constantly reevaluating it. Every single day, every single week, we will be looking at the data and seeing if there's some opportunity to modify that shelter-in-place order further. Similarly, our shelter-in-place order will actually align with the state order, which also does not have a sunset. So we're kind of coming into alignment with the state there. I want to remind you that we are not only under the local shelter-in-place order, we are also under the state shelter-in-place order. And so kind of one of the goals of this shelter-in-place order, the local one, the county one, is to come in alignment with the state and kind of be as permissive or as flexible as we could within the existing state framework. So to that end, I'm going to announce a few areas where we'll actually see some businesses come back online for the first time since the pandemic and the shelter-in-place was implemented. Number one, all forms of construction will be allowed to move forward. This is actually a really big deal. But in addition to allowing them to go forward, there are actually very stringent BMPs that are required to be implemented to make sure that they're maintaining social distancing, that they're being careful about common touch surfaces. So there are a number of fairly stringent rules that are going to be in place to make sure that employees stay safe on the job. Number two, we will have some loosening of the restrictions regarding real estate. So with respect to real estate, previously they were only allowing virtual tours or tours of homes that were unoccupied. This will actually allow an owner-occupied home, for instance, to actually vacate that home and allow someone to come through and tour it. So it'll actually allow a little bit more real estate activity to take place. I know that a lot of people, I had no idea how many people in Sonoma County golfed until my email inbox started filling up. Golf will actually be permitted as well as a recreational activity. It will be limited to twosomes, so no threesomes or foursomes. I guess this is a golf thing. We're keeping it, very modest here with our twosomes and golf. We will also be clarifying that florists are allowed to operate because we are considering flower growing to be an agricultural activity. And so just in time for Mother's Day, we will actually allow florists to be able to deliver flowers, arrange those flowers. And so that's good because it will help those flower farmers be allowed to continue to operate. Nurseries are also called out in this order as being allowed to operate. So nurseries and florists. That's a new one. Landscapers, also including for cosmetic landscaping, will be allowed to operate under the new shelter-in-place order. Previously, we only allowed vegetation management to take place. So this will allow for that to continue, but also adding all kinds of landscaping. Virtual religious services are called out as expressly being allowed in this order to make sure that we are very clear that we are supporting religious activity virtually for our community to partake in. Car and bike sales will be allowed through this order. And then the one thing that I know that a lot of parents were tracking is that the other Bay Area counties allowed camps to open up. Our order does not allow camps. I had a lengthy discussion this evening with Dr. Mace about this because I'm concerned about other parents. I know how challenging it is for parents right now who are struggling to try to work and take care of their children and homeschool them. It's a tough situation for a lot of families. The reason that we are not aligning with the Bay Area counties with respect to camps is that the Bay Area counties are actually trying to actively create herd immunity in the youth population through this opening of summer camps. We are not there yet. We really want to still make sure that we are taking care of our community, aggressively performing that surveillance testing and that close contact investigation. And so we are still taking a very much sort of contain and isolate and limit the spread of the disease in Sonoma County. So I just wanted to clear that up if you have questions about why, camps were not allowed in Sonoma County when they are allowed in Marin. And apparently this was actually a fairly controversial issue in the Bay Area counties. And so there were counties who fell on either side, but ultimately they all went forward with it. Finally, I know everyone wants to know, when will we see reopening of the economy beyond this current new version of the shelter-in-place order? And this is going to be a data-driven process. And I want to give a huge shout out because right now we are working very hard to prepare for when that reopening takes place. We don't have a date. We don't have a timeline. We're waiting to learn more and hear more from the state. But we have, I want to say a thank you to a few different people. Number one, Sheba Pearson-Whitley, our EDB director. She is working furiously to stand up an economic recovery task force. And actually, tomorrow morning, she'll be sending an email out to all of the business, different member organizations and businesses that have registered with the EDB to let them know that we actually have some best management practices, some guidelines from the health department for what businesses are going to need to think about when it comes to reopening. And then what Sheba is going to do is she's going to work with each individual sector to discuss what kinds of BMPs or best management practices they can put into place, right? So they know how they can start to sort of reorganize their business, if things need to be moved in order to create social distancing, if they need to order supplies. So she's working very hard on that. I also want to give a shout out to Dr. Jason Cunningham from West County Health Centers, Chris Denny from The Engine is Red, and Peter Rumble from the Santa Rosa Metro Chamber of Commerce. They have been working on a framework that would actually do exactly what we're doing right now, which is help to figure out how we can empower businesses when it's safe to do so to reopen. And so I'm actually going to be holding a fireside chat with them on Sunday night. So stay tuned for a little more information on that end of things. Finally, one more thing the county is doing to support businesses, we are actually going to look at large-scale sourcing of the kinds of supplies that small businesses will need to reopen. So this could be hand sanitizer, it could be PPE, or it could be stanchions. As a farmer, when I think stanchion, I think of what I put my goat on to milk her, but these are actually those sort of rope things. You have the stanchions and then you have the rope in order to guide customers into safe social distancing situations. So we're going to actually look at procuring some of those supplies in bulk as a county and then passing them on at cost to local businesses. So those are the main county updates. And now I am going to pull up the comments that folks left on my Facebook page so that I can answer those first. And then as soon as I get through that, I will turn over to the live chat. I do want to actually start out by answering a question that the former chairman of the Kashaya tribe, Reno Franklin, a wonderful leader in our community, asked. He asked about when we would be allowing recreational fishing activities to take place in Bodega Bay. I immediately got on the phone with our director of regional parks, Bert Whitaker, and I'm happy to announce that we are going to be working tirelessly around the clock to try to make sure that next week, as early as next week, we can open up recreational boating activities to allow folks to undertake fishing in Bodega Bay, and also if they wanted to, put a kayak on their truck to go out there, because that is a social distancing sort of activity. And we would anticipate that taking place at the West Side Dock and area. So wanted to let you know that that's an exciting development that I am crossing my fingers on. I also did talk to Bert Whitaker because I've heard a lot about the gradual reopening of the coast. What's the next phase? When can we start to reopen the coast? And I discussed the idea of allowing at least the folks who live there to be able to walk on the beach in the early morning hours. This is something that actually San Diego has done for decades, ever since I grew up in San Diego. And they actually have an hours at which you can, walk your dogs on the beach. And then once that hour is over, you come back. So we're thinking about possibly opening up small-scale local activity in the early morning hours so that folks who live there can walk or bike and take their animals for a walk if it's an animal friendly facility, or if it's not, just to go for a walk themselves. Okay, all right, pulling up the other questions. I apologize, I didn't have this up ahead of time. So I answered our Chairman Emeritus Franklin's question. The question is, are river beaches considered beaches which are closed under Newsom's closed beach order? So this Newsom closed beach order was a big surprise to all of us. It was originally going to be a statewide closure, and I was frantically texting our state representatives this morning as soon as I read about it in the newspaper. That was actually pulled back, and so now they're actually just closing the Orange County beaches, not the entire coastline. So we are not impacted by that order. Question from Heidi. Can you ask why the rules are arbitrary and do not conform to equal protection under the law? Example of a big box store allowed to be open using guidelines, but not a small retailer like a boutique. Or why a park is open with rules, but not a golf course. Isn't governing about the consent of the governed. So I can answer you why is the park open with rules, but not a golf course. Golf courses will be permitted under the new shelter-in-place order, which will be issued tomorrow and will take effect on May 4th. With respect to why the rules are arbitrary, I actually agree with you. I actually think that the rules are arbitrary at this point in time. And I'm actually frustrated by the fact that the state is still relying on this system of classifying essential versus non-essential businesses. What we need to be looking at is data-driven, science-based classification. And that comes around to transmission risk, not to what your business is doing, but actually how it's being conducted. Transmission risk boils down to a few things, and this is straight from our health services department, right? The number of people who are involved, the number of potential hosts. What viruses thrive on is they thrive on a host. You could be a host, I could be a host. Any human could be a host for COVID-19. So the number of potential hosts in an environment, right? That's one risk factor for transmission. Another is, what is the proximity of those hosts, right? Because the virus actually has to be able to jump from one of us to another of us. So what is the proximity? And then what is the duration of exposure? So those are the top 3 risk transmission factors that businesses need to address in order to open. When we start to classify businesses into essential versus non-essential, it doesn't make scientific sense. Because, I find it very interesting that, for instance, the governor's proposal talks about waiting for salons to open until I think it's the second to last phase, right? So you would be opening up manufacturing and office space before you opened up a hair salon. Okay, hair salon definitely does have potential close contact, but that could potentially be mitigated by PPE. It also is a lot lower volume in terms of the number of people going through. I mean, I think about actually the person that I go through for my hair, and, I'll spend 2 or 3 hours there sometimes because she takes her time. She's in her 80s. So, she was at high risk and she might not want to reopen. But the point is that one person, seeing maybe 3 clients a day actually could potentially be lower risk than, say, manufacturing that would involve hundreds of people operating in the same plant. So I really think that we need to get beyond the concept of essential versus non-essential businesses and into a data-driven, science-based, risk of transmission-based approach. So I support that, and I actually totally agree with Heidi with respect to the rules feeling arbitrary right now. And I hope that we can get into a more thoughtful framework that looks at how can we mitigate the risk and how can we recognize that a small tiny bookstore is very different than a huge large crowded whether it's a processing plant or an office building that has thousands of people. We need to look at scale and also at different mitigation measures that can be implemented rather than just what kind of business it is, because at the end of the day, COVID-19 doesn't care what your business is. They care about whether it can be transmitted, right? That's how it functions, is it functions through transmission, not type of business. All right. Heidi also mentioned that she views the orders as choosing winners and losers versus actual science and protective measures. I think I addressed that and agree with your rant and went on my own. Moving along, I see Question from Nikki. I'm seeing a lot of people I personally know coming to the river, posting pictures, and none of them live out here. So my question is, those of us that can't access by foot or biking that are locals, what should we do? Maybe be able to show we live here and can drive around for hikes or outdoor stuff, or provide a dashboard parking permit after we show proof of residency in West County. So this is a great question, and I hope that as we move towards a different parks order at some point in time, that we are able to address these kinds of issues and allow people an opportunity to drive to parks. I wish I had a better answer for you right now. I recognize that it's frustrating and not everyone is following the rules, but I still would encourage everyone to follow the rules so that we can make sure that we're keeping that curve flat so that then we can actually relax the rules further and be able to drive to the parks that we love. All right. Next question. Oh, a great point, actually. This is not a question, but a public service announcement. And this comes from Francesca of Alchemist Farms. And she wanted to let everyone know that the EDD website now has been updated so that independent contractors can apply for unemployment insurance. So if you are a small business owner, an independent contractor, go ahead and head over to the EDD website and see if you can get through to apply for unemployment insurance. All right, next question is, I just walked through the Place to Play park and the grasses and weeds are about 5 feet high. I'm sure plans are in place to have the parks mowed now that people are able to use them. This is a great question and a very important one. Annalise mentioned also, by the way, ticks are out, so it's important to make sure that we mow those grasses. A Place to Play is actually owned and operated by the City of Santa Rosa, so I will pass on that feedback to the City of Santa Rosa. If you see any regional parks that are in need of mowing, please let me know and I will pass that on to Burt Whitaker to consider maintenance. Question is, will anyone be patrolling the river accesses to enforce that only locals are there and not driving into the area to use it? I ask because when you come to the river, you also go to Safeway and buy supplies that are already at a reduced availability. I just don't know how we're going to handle tourism this year. This is a big challenge and it's very, very difficult to enforce a lot of these public health orders, and a lot of them, quite frankly, rely on everyone stepping up and doing their part and following the rules to keep others safe. Ultimately, our sheriff's deputies are tasked with enforcing, and our regional parks rangers also do have police powers on regional parks property. So please, if you see someone not following the shelter-in-place order, do call the sheriff's non-emergency phone number at 565-2121, or if it's in a regional park and you're able to flag down a ranger, please let them know. So we will work on enforcement, and I think this is going to be a very tough year with respect to tourism. It does pose a risk to our community as not currently allowed under our public health order. And so we're all going to need to step up and try to make sure that people are doing the right thing and abiding by the public health order. Question, can you answer questions about whether summer camps will be allowed this summer? Also, can you respond to Governor Newsom's comment about opening schools earlier this summer to help level the education gap children are experiencing now with homeschool and distance learning? First question, will summer camps be allowed this summer? Unfortunately, the answer is I don't know. They will not be permitted under the new iteration of the shelter-in-place order, which is expected to be released tomorrow. However, that does not take away the chance that we could potentially see summer camps or some modified form of summer camps, maybe smaller groups, with the children staying in the same group with the same care provider, the way that we're requiring daycares to function. That might be a possibility at some point this summer. Dr. Mace will be watching the data very closely and seeing if that might be feasible. But as of now, it is not currently allowed. Second question was regarding Governor Newsom's comment about reopening schools in July. Well, that was quite a shock to pretty much every family I know, and also actually every school board member I know. And I think that a lot of local school districts don't feel that they're quite yet ready to reopen in July. Ultimately, while the governor can say something like that, it is up to the local school districts to try to implement that. And in order for them to implement that, they're going to have to do a lot, right? They're going to have to think about how are they going to reconfigure classrooms? Are they going to be doing staggered start times? How are they going to, again, kind of minimize the different groups of children mingling with one another? And so I think that there's a lot of questions, and we don't yet know whether schools will be able to reopen in July, as the governor suggested. It's certainly an idea, it's certainly a thought, but there's a lot of legwork that needs to go into that before it actually becomes a reality. Question is Armstrong Woods going to open? All the neighborhood parks, which is not very many, are essentially closed if the play structures, basketball hoops, and tennis courts are off limits. What is anyone supposed to do at the park? Walk there and back home. Isn't this allowed already? Our kids need these parks to be open and functional. I absolutely agree with you, and we are working towards a more permissive sort of parks order. But right now, we want to start with this soft reopening, and then we're going to take a couple of weeks, right? We're going to hit pause. We're implementing new policies on May 4th. It takes about 2 weeks for you to see the results from an epidemiological perspective of what the change in infection rate could be from those policies. So we're going to do this. We're going to wait. We're going to see what the data says. And then hopefully, if we're still flattening the curve and it's still not increasing dramatically, we'll be able to move towards further park relaxations. So I recognize that not everyone lives within walking distance of a park. I live within walking distance of a high school, and I'm looking forward even to just walking up to the high school with my kids and letting them run around the grass and then walk home. That's pretty much all we'll be able to do, because our other parks that we like to enjoy, Forestville Youth Park, for instance, is, unfortunately a play structure, which we're not supposed to use. Okay, moving along. Question, I have a child that is entering high school at El Molino next year in Forestville. Will that be happening? Also very curious about sports and the ice arena. Right now, the ice arena and sports are not permitted under the current shelter-in-place order or the shelter-in-place order that is going to be released for public viewing tomorrow. With respect to El Molino, I'm hoping that we will have school starting in the fall, or as the governor suggested, in July. But we will have to wait and see, and it would be good to reach out to the West Sonoma County Unified High School District Board if you've got specific questions on El Molino and our local West County high schools. Someone says, I would love to safely ride my bike to work on the Joe Rodota Trail. Is there any way we can move to required masks for bikes and joggers? Riding on 12 is just not safe. So number one, yes, with the new parks order, you are allowed to ride bikes on the Joe Rodota Trail and the West County Trail and any other one of the Class 1 trails that we have in Sonoma County. So hopefully you can have a safe commute to work again. With respect to wearing masks, people should be wearing masks if they come into any kind of visibility of another human being. So if you're out walking by yourself and you don't see anyone that's passing you, even we need to maintain social distancing even with those facial coverings. But if you see another person, you should put your mask back on. So the best thing to do is, you can wear it around your neck, and that way when you see someone else, you can pull it right back up. Okay, moving along. Are house painters going to be allowed to work on home exteriors? The answer is yes. So that with a new shelter-in-place order that becomes effective on May 4th, you can paint the outside of your house, hire someone to paint the outside of your house if you would like to. I have a specific question from Robert Janover, our fantastic West County photographer, about Creative Sonoma. I do not have a specific answer to that, but I will follow up with you, Robert. I promise I will put you directly in touch with Kristen Madsen and see if we can address this issue about the grants that you're trying to receive from Creative Sonoma. Let's see, next question. Is there going to be a coordinated effort between governments to get the job of cleaning up parks and repairing the parks prior to opening them, or is it a to each their own approach? So unfortunately, it is a to each their own approach. So the county is responsible for regional parks. The cities are responsible for the city parks. So if you're seeing concerns at a particular park that is not county owned, please let me know, and I will happily share that information and try to work with our city partners to make sure that your concerns are addressed. Let's see. When will other stores be allowed to open for things such as clothing, arts and crafts, electronics and electronic repair, pet stores, etc.? This is a great question. This is what we were all waiting for, which is the governor, his executive order right now still has this shelter in place that defines businesses as essential and not essential. And the non-essential businesses right now are not allowed to operate. But he has said that we are currently in phase 1 of this shelter in place, right? Phase 1 is this essential versus non-essential framework. Phase 2 will actually involve opening up retail. So we are all eagerly awaiting when he thinks phase 2 will happen. And he is telling us that it is a matter of weeks, not months. But aside from that, we don't have a specific point in time that we have been given. However, I want you to know that on the Sonoma County local side of things, we are trying to make sure that all of those retail stores have the tools that they need so that the second that the state says yes, they can hit the ground running, and they will have all of those best management practices in place, and we'll even be working with them to secure supplies that they might need to make sure that their businesses are safe. Oh, I forgot to tell you guys. I don't think I told you last time. The county is actually developing an app. So with the support of IBM, we are going to have a free app available to every business in Sonoma County that will allow employees to perform self-health checks. So it's not going to be storing any data. We're not tracking anybody or anything like this. But what this will do is it will allow every employee, before they go to work, just take a really simple survey, sort of how are you feeling? Are you experiencing any of these symptoms? And the employer can also request that the employee take their own temperature to monitor. And so the idea is that we are actually going to try to make sure that all of the employees that are going to work are healthy. And this is something we will be implementing in county government, and we will be asking all of our businesses to participate, because we want to make sure that as we reopen Sonoma County, we do it safely. We want to ensure the safety of our employees. We want to ensure the safety of any customers or clients, and that ultimately is what will ensure the safety of our entire community and make sure that COVID-19 doesn't get out of hand in Sonoma County. Question from Joan: is Armstrong Redwoods going to open to locals to walk in like Sugarloaf, Jack London, and Annandale? I have heard that Armstrong Redwoods is not going to reopen. That's a state park. So ultimately, we're not in control of it. I can definitely reach out to the state park superintendent and see if I can learn a little bit more about the plans for state parks going forward. Had a question about golfing. I think that I answered that one. Great question from Carol. What is the status of deferral of late fees for property taxes? There should be a form on the ACTTC's website. The ACTTC, which is Eric Rozier, your elected tax collector, stands for, I think it's auditor, treasurer, tax collector, and I might have missed one. Did I say controller? Anyways, he is your tax collector, and ultimately he is the one who has the form that you can fill out in order to apply for a penalty waiver for being unable to pay your property taxes on time due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So we can look up and make sure that we post a link to that if you have a hard time finding it. But I would imagine that if you Google, COVID-19 ACTTC Eric Rozier Sonoma County, that it will come up. All right. Question from Jacob: why are Sonoma County beaches closed completely while Marin and Mendocino counties, not to mention San Francisco and Santa Cruz, allow beach access? Maybe there's a middle ground like in San Diego and other places where you can't sit at the beach. You have to be doing something active and keeping social distance. We are definitely working on how we can gently reopen the Sonoma County coast. And I'm actually planning on hosting a Zoom meeting with Burt Whitaker, our Director of Regional Parks, with state parks, and with our local fire departments along the coast to discuss how we can do this safely. So we're not ready to pull that trigger yet, but we are working on how we can make sure that we've got plans in place to protect the community when comes the time to open the coast. So we're working on it. Stay tuned. I know we all want to go to the ocean. I know it's beautiful. We will get there. We will definitely get back to the ocean. All right. Let's see. If shelter-in-place order is extended, has any consideration been given to shutting down certain streets for pedestrian use? I love this idea. And I have actually already had conversations with folks about this with respect to when the shelter-in-place order is actually lifted a little bit. And for instance, restaurants are allowed to reopen. Some restaurants will have to have such a reduced capacity in order to entertain, any guests, that it will be very hard for them to actually make ends meet. Like, they won't be able to be a profitable business model, and so they feel like they may as well not reopen. But if we were to actually shut down our streets and allow some of what the normal activity that would take place indoors to take place outdoors on sidewalks or even in the streets, we could actually create a new sort of pandemic safe economy. And so I've been having a lot of brainstorming sessions with some of our creative business owners about how we could potentially make that happen. So I absolutely support this idea of trying to shut down some streets, since we're not supposed to be driving a lot of places anyway, and trying to open that up both potentially for restaurants or other patrons or coffee shops, but also with respect to just allowing more pedestrian traffic. So, and it looks like Leo is posting the page with the COVID-19 form on the ACTTC's website. So there's a link there in the comments if you need that information. Okay. Moving along, this may seem trivial, but does the county plan to offer a 2 or however long this goes on month extension on annual park passes? We purchased our pass in February, but have been shut down from using it for nearly 2 months now. I would love to fight for a grace period to extend the all of our parks passes for the couple of months that we missed, and I will talk to Director of Regional Parks Burt Whitaker about that one. All right. Second question, is Sonoma County currently testing anyone who has COVID-19 symptoms? We are prioritizing healthcare workers, first responders, essential employees, and at-risk populations at this point in time for the public health lab. Ultimately, whether you are tested or not does come down to your healthcare provider if you fall outside of those groups, which we're focusing on from the public health lab. The good news is that we are in the process of standing up 2 new testing sites. Each new testing site will be able to test 132 tests, run 132 tests per day. So we're looking at over 260 new tests per day coming online to Sonoma County. And that's when we hope that we will get to testing anyone who has any kind of COVID-19 symptoms. Great question from Wendy. Can beauty salons work masked and one client at a time? I believe this is exactly the kind of conversation we need to be having of how can we operate safely in the midst of a pandemic? How can we reduce the risk? And so that's a great question that we can definitely bring back into this conversation with the EDB, where we're developing best management practices for all of the different industries. Any thoughts about gymnastics? I believe we have 4 centers in Sonoma County. Just wondering when we might be able to resume business and what that might look like. If you are any kind of a small business owner, including a gymnastics center business owner, please reach out to us. Excuse me, allergies, not COVID. Please reach out to us because we are, in the process of developing those best management practices. And I'm looking forward to working with the diversity of businesses that we have in Sonoma County. You know, we have canoe rentals shops. You know, what could best management practices look like for canoe rentals? You know, if and when we get the green light to engage in tourism and gymnastics classes again. So please reach out and let's try to develop those best management practices together. Question, we're getting to the end and we'll be able to go to live in just a minute. Any word on when antibody testing might be available? We have placed an order. We have not for antibody tests. We do want to get that testing capacity in Sonoma County. We have not yet gotten a delivery date for that testing equipment. Question, is there a plan for an increase of the staff for contact tracing to complement the increase of testing? Absolutely. We have actually been able to create quite a bit of surge capacity in our contact tracing workforce. We're actually both training public health nurses as well as soliciting volunteers from the medical community. So we will continue that work and make sure that we are aggressively working to contact trace and then isolate those contacts of confirmed COVID-19 positives. Question, will camps be allowed for essential workers during the summer? So we do currently have childcare as an allowable activity for essential workers, and that will continue forward in the shelter in place order. I have asked questions of, you know, whether a camp that is specifically for childcare workers, for essential workers, and really to provide childcare would be allowed, and I don't yet have additional details on that. So stay tuned. We're not allowing all wholesale camps, but it depends on, is your camp really a camp or is it just childcare? Because if it's just childcare, then it is absolutely going to be allowed this summer. If it's just a camp and it's sort of, rotating cast of children, that is not allowed under the shelter in place order. So with that, I will turn to the live chat, and sorry I got so many questions on the original one that it took a while.
Several people interested in knowing when boat ramps and boating and fishing will be okay.
Great question. So I started with this, but I think a lot of people joined afterwards. So the question is, when will boat ramps and boating be allowed? And we are actually working to try to open up recreational fishing opportunities in Bodega Bay as early as next week. So I'm working on that right now with County Council and Director of Regional Parks, Bert Whitaker. And this would actually be at Westside. So it would be opening up the boat ramp there for people to be allowed to take place to go and do recreational fishing. And also actually just recreational, you could take your truck if you've got kayaks or canoes and you want to go out onto the bay.
Do you have age breakdowns for the 25 hospitalized?
Great question. Question was, do we have aged breakdowns for the 25 hospitalized? This is something that I've been asking for weeks, and I just haven't gotten that yet. And I keep asking them to publish it publicly on the website. I will follow up again. I apologize that it's taken so long. They keep saying, yeah, I think we can do that, or let me check with the privacy health officer. And I haven't yet gotten a confirmed answer on that. So I will follow up on that one again. I think this is like the 4th time.
Do you know how school budgets will be affected?
This is a great question. Do I know how school budgets will be affected? My understanding is that the state is committed to keeping school budgets whole for this year, right? Which is almost over, quite frankly. But unfortunately, I have heard that they are considering budgets cuts for the following year. And I think this is going to be really, really hard for local school districts because whatever the situation is next year, in next school year, will still be under some kind of COVID-19 pandemic scenario in which they're likely to have to invest in, whether it's social distancing, higher sort of teacher to student ratios or staggered start times, other things that could potentially add costs, right, to their budget. And unfortunately, 48% of the state's budget is spent on schools. And so the state is actually looking at potentially cutting school budgets when, quite frankly, I think that we need to most invest in our students. So I have heard that from state representatives. It is not ultimately their final decision. It really sort of, as the entire legislature and the governor is the one who really drives the budgeting process of the state. But I have heard that there are possible cuts to school budgets for next school year. So sorry to bring that bad news.
Follow up on that. When will city schools announce their plan for the fall?
Great question. The question is, when will city schools announce their plans for the fall? I have some friends on the Santa Rosa City School board. I would be happy to reach out to them. I would imagine that there will be something coming from the office of Sonoma County Office of Education Director Steve Harrington, and that there might be a plan. I would guess that they're probably going to stick together, right? We're not going to see a ton of different school districts doing different things. In the past, I think our school districts, while we have many, have tried to make decisions sort of simultaneously in the best interest of students. So I would imagine that there will be some kind of announcement forthcoming at some point from all of the schools in Sonoma County.
When will the Human Service Department open up?
Great question. When will the Human Services Department open up? We are actually working really hard to try to get as many county employees back to work as we can, sort of both, with standing up more virtual services, but also trying to do some internal planning about how we can achieve safe operations. So recognizing that we're going to be under COVID-19 for quite some time, can we do things like we're seeing at grocery stores where you set up plexiglass, and you make sure, of course, that everyone's wearing appropriate PPE. So we are working on that. I will follow up with Karen Fees and sort of hear where she thinks that we are with respect to human services. Actually, with respect to human services, we have one of the highest sort of percentages in that department of employees still working, because a lot of them are still doing their excellent jobs and excellent work from home virtually, trying to take care of people and keep our community, safe and healthy and supported.
When would short-term rentals be allowed?
Question is, when would short-term rentals be allowed? My understanding is that would be in, I think, the third phase of the governor's plan. So we simply don't know. He has said that the second phase is in a matter of weeks and that the third phase is in a matter of months. So that, again, is sort of a very vague timeline. And unfortunately, I don't have additional information regarding the state's plans.
Did you say if pet grooming was open yet?
Did I say if pet grooming was open yet? This has been sort of a thorn in my side. And my understanding is that pet grooming will not be allowed under the new shelter-in-place order. But what I am trying to advocate for is, if this is really a matter of your pet's health, right? I mean, I have a dog that doesn't shed, and so, she just turns into a giant mop that sucks up ticks and burrs and things that can, get into her skin and irritate her skin. Not to mention it's getting very hot for a lot of dogs if they haven't, been shorn in a couple of months. So I'm trying to get some clarity, and I'm hoping that under the FAQs, we might be able to, have something that would allow someone to access pet grooming services if it's for the health of their animal. So this again is something that comes down to the state's order and classification of essential versus non-essential businesses, which I find rather frustrating. But I'll keep working on that one and see what I can find out and see if there's anything that we can do to protect the health of animals that might otherwise be overheated or negatively impacted by excess fur. So next question.
Will campgrounds and RV campgrounds open?
Will campgrounds and RV campgrounds open? At this point in time, there is no allowance for campgrounds or RV campgrounds in the local shelter-in-place order and the modifications that are proposed to begin on May 4th. I don't know when that might be reopened. I do know that Regional Parks is actually already thinking about what could they do to mitigate risk in terms of when campgrounds are allowed to reopen. And again, if you are a campground owner, I would love to hear from you, and we could have some conversations about what are those best management practices that we could implement in order to make your business safe, when you're allowed to reopen. So let's stay on that, and I would love to hear from you.
Do hotels fall into stage 3 or 4 of the
That is a great question. The question is, do hotels fall into stage 3 or 4 of the governor's plan? And I would have to double check that one. I sort of was thinking that tourism, some parts of tourism could restart on stage 3. And I think that stage 4 was more of the like convention centers and big events and sporting events, which are going to be off the table for a very long time. So I think it was stage 3, but I would have to double check because I'm very familiar with our local order and that's what's been in my brain all day. But I need to look back at what the state's phases are. And I do know that there's actually a lot of advocacy going on right now with respect to the state's phases. And I personally am engaging in advocacy because I really believe fundamentally that a one-size-fits-all solution does not work for the state of California. Here in Sonoma County, we have 500,000 people. In Alpine County, there are 1,100 people. In Los Angeles County, there are 10 million people. All three of those communities are extremely unique and have very, very different types of risks, very different types of businesses, different caseloads, different healthcare capacity, different testing capacity. Why should we be treated the same? It just does not fundamentally make sense. So I am pushing, and many other supervisors I think are also pushing, that we need to have locally sensible solutions, not ones that are guided by politics. Like I'm not saying that, I should go in and get to decide who opens and who closes. Absolutely not. But what we need to do is base those decisions in data and in science and in the best interest of the health of our community. And we have to remember that economic health actually has a direct tie to public health as well. And when you actually look at things like people's lifespan, income really affects that. And so the loss of a paycheck, the threat of the loss of housing, all of these things also have health impacts. And we need to consider the entire picture and try to do what we can to preserve the whole health of the community. So again, I don't believe in a one-size-fits-all solution. I don't believe in a solution that actually is based on industry rather than risk. I think that we need to do things that are medically driven, grounded in data and science, and actually make sense for everyone. So.
Are essential workers in veterinary medicine eligible for testing now?
Oh, great question. Are essential workers in veterinary medicine eligible for testing now? You know what? I would call that healthcare worker line and see what they say. See if you can get a test, because that it does have, a risk of exposure. And actually, I did learn from Dr. Mace that dogs actually can be a vector for COVID-19. So that is one of the reasons that we're actually not opening dog parks, is because we don't want dogs playing with one another, because it actually could be possible that a dog could transmit COVID-19 to another dog and to a human. So I think that certainly would be an argument for allowing vets and veterinary workers to access that sort of healthcare worker number. So I don't have a formal opinion on that, but I would say just call the number and see what they say. And I will double check with Dr. Mace and see if we can get veterinary care added to that list if it isn't already.
What is the possibility of opening up horse trails that require trailing in order to access?
Ooh, excellent question. What is the possibility of opening up the horse trails that require trailering to access there? So that would likely come under the next phase of our our parks order loosening, which we are, starting to look at what will the next phase for parks opening be when we allow people to drive to parks, when we allow them to have a little bit more freedom and flexibility. So stay tuned, but I will make sure that equestrian uses are being considered along with all of the other wonderful beneficial uses of walking and running and biking in our parks. So I will definitely not forget our horse riders and owners.
Our tattoo shop.
And thank you, Leo, for throwing up the number for healthcare workers. So we've got that phone number right there, 565-4667, if you are a healthcare worker and you want to access the drive-through testing.
Our tattoo shops open.
Question, are tattoo shops open? I do not think that is an essential business. So I do not think that tattoo shops are currently open, and there is no mention or addressing of tattoo shops in the new shelter-in-place order. So my understanding is that it's currently classified as non-essential and will remain so through the new shelter-in-place order. Next question.
Over the next 2 weeks, Dr. Mace is reviewing the number of positive cases or an increase in hospitalizations or something else.
Okay, great question. So the question is, what metrics is Dr. Mace using to review kind of the increase in cases? And she is looking at everything, right? So she is looking at the number of hospitalizations. She is looking at not just how many new cases we have, but how they're being transmitted, right? Are they coming from close contacts, or is there community spread happening? Because if there is community spread happening, that's more alarming than if we are actually doing a really good job with our surveillance testing and our contact tracing, and we're just seeing it spread from this person to this person. We're able to track where the virus is in our community. She's also actually going to be looking at the percent of asymptomatic folks that we're able to catch, right? We don't know what the full world of asymptomatic people are, but if she can get a sense of the number of tests that are coming back positive in asymptomatic people, that also is a piece of information that she can utilize to drive her decision-making process. And then she's also actually looking at what is the effective transmission rate of the disease overall. And her, sort of the modeler's best guess from implementing our early aggressive shelter-in-place order is that we took that R0, that sort of contagion factor that is affiliated with COVID-19, and we reduced it to a transmission factor in situ in Sonoma County of 0.625. And anything under 1 is really, really good news. And so we really want to keep that transmission factor under 1. So she's looking at all of that data. She's looking at, where is the disease? How is it spreading? What is the rate of hospitalization? How is our recovery rate sort of matching up to our, active case rate? And she's using all of that to determine what is the best course of action going forward. Additionally, she's really watching what's happening in other counties. So we're actually sort of going to be doing things a little bit differently than the other Bay Area counties. That gives an opportunity to see, hey, is the fact that other Bay Area counties are allowing camps to go forward, summer camps, is that going to cause an increase or a spike over there that we won't experience over here? So, that's just a hypothetical scenario, but looking at what's happening in other communities will help us drive better decision-making here locally. I know that I'm very closely tracking what's happening in other coastal areas. So something like, the policy in San Diego as compared to our policy, as compared to Mendocino's policy. And I know that Burt Whitaker and Dr. Mace are also tracking those very carefully as well. Other question?
When would people have access to county offices such as marriage licenses?
That is a great question. The question was, when will people have access to county offices such as marriage licenses? And that's a great question for Diva Proto, who is your clerk, and she handles sort of all of the weddings in the county, and also does the recording and the assessing. So she's got a number of titles to her name. I think it's clerk, recorder, assessor. There might be one other one. And I will reach out to Diva and find out what the status is. I would encourage you to go to her website. There is an clerk, assessor, recorder website, and that might have some information regarding the accessibility. I hadn't even thought about, are we actually still issuing marriage licenses? Because what a sad thing if people couldn't get married in Sonoma County that want to. Anyways, I will look into that and get back to you. All right. And it seems like it's wrapping up. Well, it was wonderful to spend another evening with all of you. And I want to let you know that on Sunday, we're going to be having a special edition of Fireplace Chats. And so I'm actually going to be joined by Dr. Jason Cunningham, who is the head of West County Health Centers. He has been the longtime chief medical officer, and he moved into the leadership position after Mary Seiche retired in March. I will also be joined by Sheba Pearson-Whitley, our EDB director, my colleague on the board, Supervisor David Rabbit, who is working on the economic recovery with me, and also Peter Rumble from the Santa Rosa Metro Chamber of Commerce. And all of these folks have been working on how do we help our small businesses get back, going? How can we get them ready so that when the state gives us the green light, that they're able to jump across the starting line and hopefully roar back into life in this new crazy world that we live in. So I hope that everyone is doing well, staying safe, being well. If you have any questions that I didn't cover, always feel free to send me an email, linda.hopkins@sonoma-county.org. And until then, I will see you on Sunday night. Take care.